Welcome to day 13 of the Cloud Techy AC800 and AC801 series. Today we are covering Active Directory sites. This is one of those topics that experienced admins often take for granted until something goes wrong. A new branch office opens, logins are slow, the WAN link starts getting hammered, and nobody knows why. 9 times out of 10, the cause is a misconfigured or a missing site. Before we go into technical details, let me frame why this matters from an architectural standpoint. When you deploy Active Directory, it assumes every domain controller is equally accessible to every client. That works fine in a single location environment. The moment you add a second office, a warehouse, a remote data center, the assumption breaks. Without sites, a user sitting in your Sydney branch might be authenticating against the domain controller in London. Every time they log in, is adding hundreds of milliseconds to every single authentication request. And it is not just logins. Group policy applies slower, drive mappings fail intermittently, and replication traffic churns through your most congested links. Sites are Active Directory's way of understanding your physical topology. Get them right, and the whole system routes efficiently. Get them wrong, and you get slow, unpredictable behavior that is genuinely hard to debug. Let me give you a clear definition. A site in Active Directory is a container object that represents a well-connected group of hosts, typically a physical location. It is not defined by geography, it is defined by network connectivity. The two questions AD is asking are these machines on fast, reliable links? And what IP subnets make up this location? There are three things a site does. First, it is made of IP subnets. You add CID or ranges to a site, and AD uses those to figure out where any given computer lives. And it controls which domain controller clients authenticate against. Clients prefer local DC, one in the same site. Third, it controls replication. Within a site, replication is fast and uncompressed. Between sites, it follows the rules you define. Think of site as AD's mental model of your network. The more accurately it reflects reality, the better AD performs. This is what we are building towards. Two sites, each with a domain controller, each serving its local clients. On the left, site A represents the head office. The subnets 10.0.0.0/16 is mapped to this site. DC1 lives here. When any client in that subnet logs in, the directory routes the authentication request to DC1. Local and efficient. On the right, site B is the branch office. The subnet 192.168.1.0/24 is mapped here. DC2 has been moved into the site. Branch clients authenticate against DC2. They never cross the WAN link just to log in. Between the two sites, there is a site link object. This is what tells Active Directory how to schedule replication between DC1 and DC2. Changes in one site replicate to the other, but on a controlled schedule and compressed over the WAN. This is clean documented topology. This is what we are configuring today. Setting up a new site is a 3-step. The steps are straightforward, but the order matters, and skipping any one of them produces a site that looks correct in the console, but does not actually work. Step 1 is to create the site. You are just registering the location in Active Directory, giving it a name, and associating it with a site link object. At this point, the site exists, but it is completely empty. Step 2 is to map the subnet. This is a critical one. You tell Active Directory which IP range belongs to this site. Without this, the site is invisible to the clients. AD cannot route any login to it because it cannot match an IP address to a location. Three is to move the domain controller. You relocate the DC's NTDS settings object into the new site. Active Directory now knows there is a local DC available for that subnet. Get all three right and the site works immediately. And if you miss the subnet mapping, nothing works and you will spend hours wondering why. Step 1. Creating the site is the simplest of the three. Open Active Directory Sites and Services. Right-click the Sites folder and select New Site. Give it a meaningful, consistent name. I recommend using the city or building name, followed by the function something like Ludington branch. You will see this name in logs and troubleshooting commands, and it will be the first thing you read when something goes wrong. So make it unambiguous. During creation, you will be asked to associate it with a site link. If you only have one WAN connection, just select default IP site link. If you have a more complex multi-site topology, select the appropriate site link for this location. The partial equivalent is new-AD replication site with a name and optional description. At the step, the site exists in Active Directory, but it is completely init. No client can be placed in it because no subnets are mapped to it yet. That is step 2. Step 2 is one that catches people. It is visually in a completely different place in the console, not under the site you just created, but under a separate subnets folder at the top level. Many admins create the site and move the DC, then wonder why clients are still hitting the wrong DC. It is always this step 2. Right-click the subnets folder and select New Subnet. Enter your network address in CIDR notation. That's the IP range and the prefix length. And then select your new site from the dropdown. That's the link that makes everything work. The partial command is new-AD replication subnet. The CIDR range as the name parameter and specify the site. You can also add a location description, which helps with documentation. Once this is done, Active Directory can take any client's IP address, match it to this subnet, and place the client in the Ludington site. Without it, the site is a container with no contents. It does absolutely nothing. The third step in moving the domain controller into the new site. This is often where admins expect to physically move something, but it is entirely a logical operation. The server does not move. What you're moving is the DC's NTDS settings object, which is the Active Directory representation of that domain controller's role and the replication topology. In the console, expand the site the DC currently belongs to, properly default first site name if this is a new deployment. Expand servers, then expand the DC. You will see an object called NTDS settings. Right-click it and select Move. Choose the new site from the dialog. In PowerShell, use move-AD directory server with the DC's identity and target site name. After the step, the directory knows that DC2 is physically located in the Ludington site. Clients there will now be routed it for authentication. Replication between DC1 and DC2 will follow the site link schedule. The topology is complete. After completing the 3 setup steps, run these 3 verification commands before you consider the work done. Run all 3 before telling anyone the branch authentication is ready. If all 3 shows correct values, your site is operational. Now let me walk you through what you will see when the sites are misconfigured, because these symptoms show up in production regularly and they are genuinely confusing until you understand the cause. The most visible symptom is slow logins. If a user in the branch is authenticating against the DC across a WAN link, every login is slow. Every mapped drive takes longer to connect. Every GPO takes longer to apply. Users will raise help desk tickets, and unless you know to look at site topology, it is hard to diagnose. WAN saturation is a second symptom. If two DCs in different physical locations are treated as being in the same site, replication between them is uncompressed and runs every 15 seconds. There's a lot of traffic on a slow link. Event ID 5807 is your diagnostic friend. When Active Directory encounters a client on a subnet, it is not mapped to any site. It writes this event to the system log. If you see 5807, go straight to get-AD replication subnet and find the missing mapping. When you create a new site and associate it with a site link, you are connecting it to the inter-site replication topology. Let me explain the 4 properties of a site link that matter. Host determines the path preference. If you have 2 WAN connections between head office and the branch, you can set different costs on each site link, so AD prefers the faster link and only uses the slower one as a backup. Interval controls how often AD checks for changes to replicate across that link. The default is 180 minutes, 3 hours. You can reduce this for sites where you need changes to propagate faster down to a minimum of 15 minutes. Schedule lets you define which hours replication is permitted. This is useful if you want to avoid saturating a congested link during peak business hours. For most environments, the default IP site link works fine. You adjust these properties when you have specific performance or bandwidth requirements. Let me tell you about the mistake that catches nearly every admin the first time they configure a site, and that I have seen experienced engineers make on large production environments. The site gets created, the domain controller gets moved, the job looks done, but the subnet was never mapped. The reason this happens is that the subnets folder is not inside your site in the console tree. It sits at a different level entirely. If you're working quickly or following a checklist that does not explicitly call this out, it is easy to move on without completing it. The symptom is that clients behave exactly as if no site were configured, because as far as AD is concerned, there isn't one. The site exists, but no client can be placed in it. Your diagnostic signal is event ID 5807 in the system log. Read it carefully. It tells you the exact subnet that is not mapped. Go create the subnet mapping and the site starts working immediately. Here's your reference for the next time you set up a site. First one is to plan before you open the console. Know the IP subnet range, know the site link you will use, know the DC you will move. 2 minutes of planning prevents the most common mistake. Second one is to create a site with new-AD replication site. Use a name that will still make sense to different admin 2 years from now. Third one is to map the subnet with new-AD replication subnet. Do not skip this. Do it before you move the DC. Fourth one is to move the DC with move-AD directory server. Verify you are specifying the correct DC name. Fifth one is to verify with all 3 get commands before you declare the work done. Sixth is to monitor the system log for event 5807 for the first 24 hours. If it fires, you have a missing subnet mapping somewhere. 5 things to carry from this video, and these come up in the AC 800 exam and they come up in production. First, a site without a subnet mapping does nothing. You can have the site, the DC, the site link. None of it matters if the subnet is not mapped. The directory cannot place clients in a site it cannot identify from their IP address. Second, clients prefer site local DCs. No local DC means they go wherever they can reach one. This is by design, but it means your branch users are getting slower servers than they should. Third, understand the replication difference. Within a site, fast, uncompressed 15-second intervals between sites, compressed on your schedule, controlled by the site link. Fourth is no event 5807. It tells you exactly which subnet is the problem. If you say it, you know what to fix. Fifth is move-AD directory server as a logical operation. The physical server does not change location. You are changing its Active Directory membership. Site defines your network. Subnets make them real. That is a single thing to remember from this video. You can create 100 sites in Active Directory sites and services. Without subnet mappings, every single one of them is invisible. The subnet mapping is what connects your logical site to your actual network. If you take one thing into your exam and in your next real-world deployment, it is this. The site is the container, the subnet mapping is what makes it work. Thanks for watching.